My name is Morten here from flipnormals.com, and today we're going to take a look at how we can sculpt a dragon inside of ZBrush. And usually when I start out sculpting, I have some sort of reference in mind. And for this little project, I made a reference sheet inside of Photoshop, and I just put some pictures together of dragons that I thought looked cool. And I recently went and watched How to Train Your Dragon 2. So, I mean, this tutorial might just be an excuse to actually sculpt a dragon. And it was supposed to just be a bust, like a bust of a dragon, but yeah, it turned out to be a full dragon. So whenever I start a sculpt, I always try to like keep the form in mind. And that's the great thing about ZBrush, and like right now I'm working with Dynamesh, is that I can just sort of freeform everything and quickly add and subtract stuff without really thinking about topology and really being restricted by all this like technical nonsense. So in the beginning, I try to work in the overall shape that I want, and I found a pose of a dragon on my reference sheet that I really liked. So I'm gonna try and aim for a pose inspired by that. Yeah. So I'm trying to give it this circular shape. The circular shape is gonna be, I mean, limited to the body, and then the wings, like you see now, are gonna come off it and be extended. So it's gonna have this, I guess, intimidating kind of pose. And something I do a lot is check my silhouette. I usually do that with like just a flat white color material. This is great for checking stuff like intersections and tangents and stuff like that. And I try to avoid detailing for a very long time, actually. Just working with the basic shape. Uh, Even though, I mean, right now it looks like some sort of fat, ugly butterfree or whatever. And that's sort of like, you're gonna stay in that stage for quite a while. And I remember in the beginning when I started sculpting, it took me a while to get past this stage. It can be quite depressing because your model can look like, well, awful for quite a while. And you just gotta have like the final product in mind when you're sculpting, and just be confident enough that you can get there at some point. You might be spending 5, 10 hours on a sculpt, and if you sit there for too long and just tell yourself that, oh man, this looks like crap, then it's probably gonna look like crap. So it's great to keep that in mind, that it will look great. It just might take a while to actually get there. And so like the wings here are going to be quite sort of like a centerpiece for the sculpt, because they're going to be completely extended and they're going to take quite a lot of focus. I want to invest a lot of time in them to get the right shape and the right feel. And for some of this stuff, like anatomy wise, you gotta just, I mean, you gotta know some of your creature anatomy and stuff to actually pull this off. And looking at birds or something like bats could be beneficial for this. And again, it's being kept very simple for, I don't know, 2/3 of the actual sculpt. I don't start detailing until very late in the project. But starting to refine my shape a little more. You can see I still try to keep this sort of circular shape to the body, while extending the wings sort of in a contrasting direction, just to give the piece some more visual interest. And these legs are, I don't know, these legs were tricky, but yeah, I think they turned out quite funny. I don't know if they really fit the actual sculpt, but I wanted to sort of stay away from this sort of classical fantasy dragon look, which is why I really like the designs that Nico Mallet did for How to Train Your Dragon. Um, I don't know if he did. I don't know how many he did for the sequel, but the dragons in that one were cool as well. So I'm trying to draw a lot of inspiration for that. I'm also looking at some of the dragon design for Game of Thrones, just because that's more realistic. So I'm trying to combine those two, um, just to get something interesting. And I want to get this sort of uh, big and like I want it to look like a big dragon, like it's a muscular dragon. Um, a lot of especially fantasy dragons, I feel like are very sleek and elegant. This I don't want this to be. It's got like a very dominant jaw, and that's something I wanna focus on. And again, you see me checking it with a flat color just to see if the silhouette still works. If the wings are blocking anything. It is also a little tricky to actually see what it's going to look like in its final form because I don't start posing until very late because I'm working with symmetry at the moment. So, and that's just to save time. Um, really, I tend to do that for a lot of projects. Work with symmetry, and then towards the end, you start roughing it up, and like making the two different sides obviously different. For this project, there isn't that much time, so it doesn't make sense to actually sculpt asymmetrically. And one part I want to focus on is the chest area because its wings are so extended. Um, I feel like, especially for something like a dragon, I would imagine that you need quite a dense chest with a lot of muscle in there to actually to pull those wings if you imagine like a dragon being a massive and spectacular creature, you would need a lot of muscle. So I'm trying to make the chest area protrude a lot and really be apparent. And for the tail, it's yeah, I wanted to have a lot of different visual elements and not just be like a lizard tail where it's just like from the back and just going down. But I want to create some interest, like some visual interest in it, even though it'll be sort of in the background, I think. But we'll see what happens. Still trying to preserve the shape, and you can see the shape hasn't changed that much. Like it's pretty set now. The shape that the overall shape that the dragon is going to be, and still not concerning myself too much with details. I mean, I've started putting in some details in like bony landmarks for wings and the tail and in the face and things like that. But it's still everything is still very very vague. And these parts are going to be I think I'm going to go back and forth a lot just because I want to get the right feel from these wings, and you're going to see the wings change a lot during this video. Also, remember to save your work. Yeah, that was. And a trick you see me doing there is when you select you mask off a part of an object, you can control click on the border of the masked and unmasked area, and it'll smooth out the masked area for a better transition. So when you move your unmasked part around, it won't leave harsh edges. Yeah, and these are the feet that I wasn't too keen on. I mean, I felt like it started to look too much like a duck. So I'll change that in a bit for some more stylized feet, and sort of extend the tail as well. Like if you look at it now, there's not the original shape that I had kind of disappeared because I made the tail a little too short. So I'm trying to play with the proportions of the tail, and also the lower body. Just, here we're starting to define where the bones in the wings are going to be. This isn't like sort of set in stone. This is just like a guide for me to know how to shape the wings better. So I mean, I won't be detailing this for a long time. Just trying to gauge the proportions, seeing what works, what doesn't. I also a few times try to put in uh, like front legs, but I never really quite thought that they fit in. It started looking like a weird gargoyle, and obviously you don't want that. So, and in terms of the face, we're also going to spend some time on the face later, because that's sort of going to be what you look at the most. And what you see me do there was you saw the holes in the mesh. That can occur when you use Dynamesh and two surfaces get too close together. So the trick I do for fixing those holes is I use the inflate brush, just inflate it so the mesh sort of intersects again, and then I just remesh it and smooth it out. Just playing with the stomach area, putting in some muscle, and checking the silhouette again. I'm starting to define the planes a little more with the trim dynamic brush. It's really good for that. And the clay builder brush, like an alpha-less clay builder brush, is also very good for defining surfaces. But I really like the trim dynamic brush for that. I won't be using it that much because I want to keep this piece fairly organic from now on. But the trim dynamic brush can be very useful in the beginning, I think, and also for hard surface models. So now we're looking at the tail again, and it's feeling a little off because of the length. So what I'll do is I'll extend it down to get this sort of semicircle design going. I don't know what I'm doing with those feet, like these platypus feet. They're just, yeah, they'll come into play later. Hopefully it'll work out. And when you're doing these sort of long tubular things like tails and things like that need to be smooth and not have too many bumps in it. I find it really useful to just go back and forth with different kind of smoothing algorithms, like holding down shift, letting go of shift while smoothing, which is really great. And you see me going out a lot as well, even though I'm not checking the apparently the silhouette with the flat color. I'm still sort of gauging the silhouette and zooming out, squinting, looking how does the design look from afar, just to make sure that everything fits together, to make sure something doesn't pop out too much. And this weird little nose area started to bother me. I felt like it looked too much like a bat. So I'm pushing that back in. And this area of the wing is an interesting one because there needs to be like a bend halfway up between the base, like the shoulder joint, and where the sort of like phalanges of the wings extend. And you'll see me play around with that a little later in the video, trying to figure out how the muscles should attach and stuff. And this tail thing, like you definitely notice from like How to Train Your Dragon, where they play around with these a lot. And I think it looks cool and it makes sense for sort of like balancing So I want to try to incorporate that into my model. I'm trying to figure out how that intersects with the wing and the lower part of the like the tiny wing underneath the big wing. Like how do those two like sort of work together and intersect is something I thought a lot about. Now these legs, I've changed them quite a bit from sort of like standard, what should we call them, dragon hind legs or whatever. But I thought they had an interesting shape to them, so I'm going to try to keep going with that. And you can see now I'm just trying to fill in the chest area to, like we talked about earlier, trying to define those muscles, and because I feel like it needs a lot of muscle to pull those big wings. And the play between the upper part and the lower part of the wing is I want them not to, I want them to have a similar shape. So it looks like a miniature version of the big wing, but I want them to be in different positions. So I'll probably extend the upper part of the wings a little more and then separate the lower part just so you can see them and make for an interesting silhouette. And for the pose, like I'll try to get as close to the final pose like symmetrically as I can, but there'll be a lot of changes once I start going out of symmetry mode. But just so I don't have to change the model too much, because then you need sculptural changes and that just takes more time. And I want to try and play around with sort of the length of the neck and the stature of the sort of the jaw. Playing with the ratio like length between the upper part of the leg and the lower part of his legs. But I'm quite happy with those legs. I think they look interesting. I'm gonna stick with those. But proportion wise, I still think they're a little off. Looking at his face is just massive right now, so that'll need to either be scaled down or the legs need to be scaled up. And trying to make the wings a little more dynamic in shape, and as well with the face, not necessarily making the face more dynamic, but sort of trying to enclose it, making this sort of crown around his face so you really, there's some contrast between the shape in the front of his face where his eyes are and the back of his face where his spikes are, so we can sort of distinguish that. And I really like this big jaw that he has, because he is this sort of muscular type dragon. I want him to have like a big jaw. Quite a massive underbite. But that could be quite interesting for the design. And when I do work in Dynamesh, I tend to stay quite low for a long time, just because I don't. If I have the freedom to add detail, I will. I just can't control myself. So in order to limit myself, I really try to stay low for as long as possible until I really can't get any more out of that sub D level, and then I'll go up. And I'll stay in Dynamesh mode for a long time until I eventually retopologize it and sort of optimize my mesh. You see the wings now have changed quite a bit from the beginning, and I like them a lot more now. They're a lot more visually pleasing to me. They have this sort of towering tallness to them now, whereas before I thought they were too clunky. And just, you see the definition of the phalanges in the wings, but they'll change. They're just a guide, a reference for now. The face it feels too thin for what he is, so that'll need to be widened and worked on. And the main brushes that I use throughout this tutorial, and I guess generally, are the clay buildup brush, with and without alpha. I tend to use the clay builder brush with an alpha in the beginning just because it gives me a lot of detail for free. And once I get into actually building more the subtle forms, I'll turn off the alpha because it gives you a nice smoothness to the model. Then I use the move brush like all the time. I think 80% of the time I'm just using the move brush. And then sometimes the move topological because it's very practical for a mesh with a lot of close things together. And then the Damien standard and standard brush as well are very useful, especially the Damien standard brush for this mesh where you have these, you can make these sort of bony protrusions or scales and just really hard edges. If you invert the brush, like if you hold down Alt while you're using it, you make a peak instead of like a valley, and you can make some really nice and strong shapes with it. You can get almost the same result with the standard brush. I just feel like the Damien standard brush works better for me. But you should definitely experiment with that and just see what you can get at. And at this stage, I guess we're like more than halfway into the sculpt, and like we haven't really I mean, we've started to define some general details like the placement of the eyes and nostrils and some shapes in terms of like horns and stuff, but it's nothing like compared to what, like, if we would finalize the sculpt, that still comes later, because I still don't want to bog down. As soon as I start detailing, I feel like that's when the sculpt is sort of coming to an end. Like the detailing part is really fun, but I feel like you start to limit yourself. Once you start detailing, you don't really want to take that detail away again. It's like once your paint is dry, you're like, I really like the way that this feels or looks now, but maybe I could change it a little bit, but then you would have to redo your work. And so working on like low-res stuff for a while until you're really satisfied with the design, I feel like helps a lot. And these protrusions got a little too much. It's a little too evil for me. Just a personal preference, I guess. But you can see in terms of like overall design, like not a lot of things are changing now. The silhouette is pretty much there. Most of the forms have been designed, and we're slowly moving into the detail part now. Now what I'll do here is I realized that my face, because I use C-remesher to remesh my model, and the face receives sort of like the same density as the rest of the body, so there's not enough detail to actually go in and sculpt properly here. So I've actually isolated the face, and when you're in isolate mode, you can press Control W, and when you press Control W, you'll automatically assign a polygroup to your selection. So I take that selection, I go down to a lower sub D level, and I subdivide the mesh. And whenever I subdivide what's isolated, you only subdivide that part of the mesh. So you'll end up with a higher subdivision level on the isolated part. This is really great for, I mean, just like a concept sculpt like this. Obviously, this wouldn't work for like a production model because it leaves a lot of artifacts on the border between the unsubdivided mesh and the subdivided mesh. And here you'll see me going in with a clay builder brush without an alpha because it has this really nice and soft feel to it. And it's really good for producing volumes. And yeah, just it's a lovely brush for once you get into the detailing part, I think. Just adding some random horn detail. I don't know what you want to call that. And you can see we've worked on the expression now with the clay buildup brush and sort of defined some of the creases with the Damien standard brush. And this is, I just go back and forth like this really. Bigger volumes and bigger shapes I make with the clay buildup brush, and then I make gaps and finer details with the Damien standard brush. So like here, making the creases for the eyelids and the eye socket, pushing in the eye a little bit more. Kind of looks like a rhino. It's like a weird bat, rhino, dragon thing. Oh well. Oh, another brush that's really good for this sort of stuff is the pinch brush. When you have a mouth like this and you want to close it and you can't really go in there with the move topological brush, you just use the pinch brush to sort of like pull the mouth a little closer together. It's also really great for making sharp creases and things like that. I want to define a thicker brow to sort of complement his thicker jaw and his stature, because he is quite wide. And now we actually start getting into sort of like the final detail of it, where we take our time, where we place things. These are the phalanges for the lower part of the wing. Right now the wing is still very thick, so I'll go in with the clay buildup brush. I'll just smooth it out quickly, and go in with the clay buildup brush to just roughen up the wing. And generally I don't use the smooth brush too much, because I feel like it tends to destroy my model a little too much. I want to keep some of that random detail that I get from the clay buildup brush in the early parts of the process. So if I do want to smooth out, I tend to use a brush on top, or like subtract some stuff. It takes a little longer, but I think the end result is a lot nicer than if you just go over your model constantly and smooth. I mean, there's something to be said for a very clean model. I'm not saying that. I just I prefer my models not to be like super clean. I like them to have a little bit of bumpiness and roughness in there, sort of like a. I feel like it makes them more real. This sort of perfect Barbie doll kind of polished look. But I mean that's just a personal preference. So. And yeah, you see how the buildup brush here is used just to create a little random texture in the wing. And this is the one without an alpha. So you just go into the alpha menu and press alpha off. You can do that with any brush. Just checking my silhouettes once again. And now I feel like the face is a little vague, like some of the shapes, like it's quite defined, but some of the shapes could use some like sharpening on them, like especially around the eyes, because you always tend to focus your attention towards eyes. So I want to just polish that area a little bit. Let's make some bumps, some sort of visual interest, again, to just sort of like pull you in. That it like these tiny bumps create a little bit of contrast on smooth surfaces, so you'll tend to look there more than just on like bare surfaces. And now we get into the posing part, where I go out of symmetry mode, and I just sort of move the obvious parts, especially around the middle. That's where you really start to notice that a model is symmetrical. So I've made him a little lopsided in the face now. Not too much, because we'd be turning him and probably looking at him from a little bit of a side view. So we won't actually see the center line that much. But still. So I want to create some more dynamic pose, sort of like he's about to land or just took off. I guess more like he took off, like he just took off. So I want to get this forward dynamic posing in the character. And obviously offsetting everything so it's not perfectly centered will help a lot. So like twisting the head and curving the spine more, and especially the tail. Like because the tail is a very thin piece part of the piece, but it's a very prominent part. And you can really play around with this a lot. So what I want to do is I want to try to encircle him and sort of like lead your eye with the tail and like pull it underneath him, but then to like twist it around. And I'll be checking the silhouette a lot, because once you start getting into posing, like right now I've been checking the silhouette just like symmetrically, where everything looks nice and there isn't too much intersection between different parts of the body. But once you start getting into posing, where everything will crisscross, and I want to try to eliminate tangents as much as possible. I mean, obviously you can't like remove all tangents all the time, but you want to get rid of the worst of them. So we want to make some contrasting shapes here, like some like straight lines going into like this big curve of the tail. Trying to extend the body a little more and playing with the proportions just to balance it a bit more. Yeah, checking the silhouette again. Now I'm going to pose the legs, because the legs, like, this guy doesn't have hands. He has wings. He has massive wings for hands. So we want to try and get some sort of gesture into the legs. A very masculine pose there. But yeah, trying to get some sort of dynamic pose into the legs. And I guess it does have some human elements to it, which does make it look kind of freaky. But I think we can try to use that to our advantage to sort of get this like leaping pose that a person would maybe make, but like exaggerated a little bit more. And it's great when you're working on like a model like this, like having subds is great, because you can jump down to the lower levels and work on the mesh there when you're doing your posing. And like I'm doing here, jump back up to do like sculptural corrections, just because like, especially now where the body's twisted and stretched, you want to squash the ribs on one side and maybe extend them on the other. Just adjust the wing a little bit more just to get it further down, just a little more away from the other wing. But now there's a slight problem with the lower wing in the back, because now you can't really see the silhouette that well. So I'll try to pull it down a little bit. But that's really like what the last part of the sculpting process is like. It's just fiddling with tiny things. I really think the interesting part is the beginning part, where you're investing a lot more time there in the sculpting and designing, because you want to make everything work together. I mean, there's something to be said for the detailing part, because that's like the icing you put on there, but you want to wait with that, really. Like I said, as soon as you start putting all the details in, that's when you get too attached to your work, and you don't really want to change it after that. Or at least that's my experience. Yeah. Getting close and trying to put some final touches on the pose. And see, the silhouette works a lot better now. Trying to fix the tail, because it like intersects or like crosses the legs. I want to try and separate it a little bit more, pulling it out to the side so we clear the legs. You see there, now it goes between the legs instead of looking like it extends one leg. And then just like towards the end here, we just want to add like some final touches of like noise, basically. Just some like slight visual interest. Again, I'm focusing my details around the face, because usually that's where you want to look. So because the wings are such a big entity on this guy, I don't feel like I need to detail them as much. So I want to keep it like a balance between visual interest on his face. So there kind of be like two focal points in this piece, where one will be the face, which will be quite small, like overall, and then than the wings. But I'm hoping by creating more visual noise, I guess noise, in the face, you'll try to look at that one as well. And I didn't really have like a alpha handy for scales, so I just used the clay buildup brush where I just like sculpted something quickly and then invert the brush, Damien standard, to outline it. Now this rear part is really annoying me, so like you see it's kind of conflicting with the wing again. So I'll also want to pull this part down just to separate it just a little bit. You can see there it just hits the tip of the wing there. But just to clear it and really make the silhouette perfect at the end here. Yeah, and there we go. That's my dragon sculpt. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. And again, like when doing this sort of sculpting, I guess this applies for a lot of things. You don't want to just, I mean, this isn't just a sculpting a dragon tutorial. I hope you can sort of abstract like the concepts that we talked about here and apply those to other pieces that you want to make. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.